President Biden always said that he wants you to be the last person in the room, particularly for big decisions, just as he was for President Obama. He just made a really big decision. Afghanistan.
Yes.
Were you the last person in the room?
Yes.
And you feel comfortable?
I do.
Welcome back to the DeVory Darkins Show. 13 service members lost their lives August 26th of 2021 when President Biden gave the order for them to withdraw from Afghanistan. The only problem with this order, it resulted in their death and one of the most embarrassing operations in military history. So today, former President Trump visited Arlington National Cemetery to pay respects and recognize these 13 service members. Now, the reaction from the fake news media might shock you.
Jump to the campaign a little bit. This morning, former President Trump was at Arlington National Cemetery where he marked the 3-year anniversary of the bombing that killed 13 service members during the Afghanistan withdrawal. This is someone who, according to his own former chief of staff, said Americans who died in war are, quote, suckers and losers. Trump denies that, although John Kelly confirms that Trump did say that. He more recently said a civilian award is, quote, better than the Medal of Honor. You're a former Army Ranger. Is he politicizing these soldiers' deaths? Should he even be at Arlington National Cemetery if he's going to make some politics out of this?
Well, I also mourn the death of those 13 service members. You know, every death of a service member is a tragedy. At the same time, I mourn the deaths of the over 2,400 service members who died during the 20 years we were at war. And I just look at President Biden, under whose leadership we actually ended and made the tough decision to end our nation's longest war. It became very clear to me years ago that this war was not winnable through military means. And sitting here today, we are honoring the death of those who died in service to our country. And at the same time, we are not at war in Afghanistan. And that was the right decision by President Biden.
Okay, so you see where Jim Acosta, the guy who has Trump derangement syndrome, is going with this. So let me at least share a few facts with you, the listener. Fact number one, it was President Trump who negotiated the agreement for U.S. to withdraw from Afghanistan. And then it was on Biden, because Biden won the election, it was on him to carry out that agreement. So no matter what they say, that is the fact. They may argue what was in the agreement. They may argue what they didn't like about the agreement, but there was an agreement in place to withdraw from Afghanistan. The executional part, that's on the Biden administration. Fact number two, which includes some numbers for you guys. I want to get these numbers exact because when you go on the news and you're talking about this stuff, I think it's very important to make sure your numbers are accurate. The total deaths when you're talking about the soldiers in both wars, in Afghanistan, 2,401, and then in Iraq, 6,951. When you're talking about U.S. contractors, which worked side by side with military soldiers who also are American citizens, 7,820 deaths in Iraq and 3,937 in Afghanistan. Now, the total number of people that were casualties of these wars, if you add them all up, is somewhere between 479,000 and 507,000. So for them to come out and say, well, is Trump politicizing this? You guys refuse to hold any of these other presidents accountable. Majority of the deaths are under Barack Obama and George Bush, but you never bring that up. You don't bring up the fact that Trump was the only president that actually had a legitimate agreement for us to withdraw. And the last fact is the media is spending more time criticizing Trump for recognizing these 13 service members today versus recognizing the 13 service members, right? Like they're using more of the airtime on him and not the actual service members. So why don't we dedicate some time to them? So that's just a snippet of the ceremony. Of course, we give our hearts to these families. We thank these soldiers that did die in these wars over the last 2 decades. And when they talk about the suckers and losers lie that they like to bring up, even though everyone who was in the room also debunked and said General Kelly was lying about that. It's just funny how the news uses that to continue to overshadow the service members here. And so what we're going to do in the rest of this video is debunk their lies and respect these service members by playing this video.
Afghanistan.
Yes.
Were you the last person in the room?
Yes.
And you feel comfortable?
I do.
We know that at least 13 U.S. service members were killed in the blast.
He claimed that on his watch, we have not lost any American troops. The lives of no American troops have been lost as long as he's been president. Obviously, that is not true. Apparently, he's already forgotten about the 13 American heroes who were lost with his disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. These are their names, Mr. President. These are their names. Marine Staff Sergeant Taylor Hoover. Marine Sergeant Johanny Rosario Pichardo. Marine Sergeant Nicole G. Marine Corporal Hunter Lopez. Marine Corporal Dagan Page. Marine Corporal Humberto Sanchez. Marine Lance Corporal David Espinoza. Marine Lance Corporal Jared Schmitz. Marine Lance Corporal Riley McCollum. Marine Lance Corporal Dylan Marola. Marine Lance Corporal Kareem Nakui. Navy Petty Officer 3rd Class Maxton Soviak. Army Staff Sergeant Ryan Knaus.
Those are the names, of course, and let's debunk a few lies here. She shares responsibility in this, Kamala Harris, right? But her campaign and the Democrats are going to do whatever they can to hide that fact. She was the last person in the room. She celebrated the decision, and she hasn't actually publicly came out and taken any level of responsibility when it came to this debacle. And of course, she wouldn't, because President Biden hasn't either. And for the people who do support her, who want her to have her own voice, right? Wouldn't this be a good way to separate herself from President Biden to say, hey, you know what? I actually didn't agree with the way that we executed that. And I want to give my thanks to these families. And so I'm going to call them and I'm going to meet with them because I'm about to become the commander in chief. I mean, listen, I'm never going to vote for her. I don't support her. But as a competitor, I would respect that. But of course, she's not going to do that. They're going to try to hide this as much as possible.
And he has never clarified it himself or apologized for those remarks himself. I know he offered praise and recognition of these soldiers' bravery 3 years ago, but he has never corrected the record to say, I was wrong and I was callously wrong.
What he was referring to, and he understands that there were family members that, that didn't like that, but what he was referring to was the fact that he ended America's longest war and that we don't have American troops, on the ground in major ways fighting overseas wars. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't have troops in harm's way. Of course we do. We have some in Iraq. We have some in Syria. We have some at sea, and certainly we have some in the air every single day, and he knows that.
But it's very little comfort, right, to those families, John, and I don't want to extend this beyond what you yourself have tried to clarify, but the president himself, if you make an incorrect statement, and you keep making that incorrect statement, is he compelled himself, wherever he is, vacationing or not, to say, I was wrong to miss this obvious point about no soldiers dying under my watch.
The president was making a larger point about ending our longest war.
Yeah, but they're
no
a
other
large
commander
point,
in chief.
right, John? They're a large point.
He also recognizes, Neil, that nothing he can say, particularly on a day like today, when we should be remembering the 13 who were killed at Abbey Gate, nothing he can say is going to assuage their grief, their sorrow. Nothing he's going to be able to say or do is going to make them feel better about losing their loved ones.
So if that is the case, then why not just tell the truth? Why not just say, hey, you know what? I misspoke. I mean, can you do that at a minimum? It seems Tim Walz with Stolen Valor, he was able to do that. You know, why can't you? You're supposed to be the commander in chief. The buck stops with you. You're supposed to set the example. You can't come out and say, you know what? When I was on that debate stage, I misspoke.
I had a notion that we were this safe country. The truth is, I'm the only president this century that doesn't have this decade, that doesn't have any troops dying anywhere in the world like he did.
This is the type of party that we're dealing with here, folks. We're dealing with a Democratic Party that is not the Democrats you think they are. They're not your father's Democrats or your grandfather's Democrats. This is a totally different party that does not share those values anymore. I mean, it's just certain things are common sense. When we're talking about military and veterans and people sacrificing their lives, shouldn't be any lies around that. That's the problem with Tim Walz, is when you're doing something and you've served 24 years in the military, there shouldn't be any lies. There shouldn't be any misunderstandings. There shouldn't be any situations where it's like, oh, well, I misspoke. It just shouldn't happen. And of course, this speaks to the obvious truth that there's a reason why Kamala Harris hasn't spoken on this publicly, because, again, she will mess it up, right? And then she'll have to walk back some comments, right? I mean, that's what she's been doing her entire campaign. She's been trying to walk back everything she said back in 2020. So it would make sense that Democrats are absolutely silent on this, and they're not going to take true responsibility. But they want everyday Americans to vote for them. But this is part of their resume. This is part of the results.
In case some of you are not aware of what today is, it has been 3 years today since we lost 13 of our service members during the botched Afghanistan withdrawal carried out by the Biden-Harris administration. Who was at Arlington National Cemetery this morning paying respects to the fallen? Not Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Trump was, though. A man acting more like the commander-in-chief than the actual commander-in-chief that we currently have in office. Schedules were cleared, vacations being had, but can't spare not even an hour to honor the lives that were lost due to your incompetence. I think given these defining moments, I can confidently speak for majority of military families when I say that I would rather have my service member continue his service under a Trump administration than an incompetent, anti-American, belligerent administration with Kamala leading the charge. I'd rather not have my husband serving under a government with no accountability at the highest level that faked patriotism for an entire week, but can't even spare not even a few minutes except for a tweet.
I mean, she couldn't have said it any better. It's interesting. They spent an entire week, millions of dollars, to go to Chicago and host a convention. And not 1 minute was spent recognizing these 13 service members. So, of course, Kamala Harris wants us to believe that she's going to be the best commander-in-chief for all Americans and that she's going to build the strongest fighting force the military has ever seen and that she's someone that we should trust. But when it comes to her judgment, should we?
President Biden always said that he wants you to be the last person in the room, particularly for big decisions, just as he was for President Obama. He just made a really big decision. Afghanistan.
Yes.
Were you the last person in the room?
Yes.
And you feel comfortable?
I do.
She feels comfortable. She has to, because he experienced a steep dip in mental decline and she had to cover it up. And she's a puppet, so she has to say what she has to say to keep this moving along. And that is an example of spitting in the face of so many veterans. You see, what I have a problem with when it comes to people who say they have a problem with Trump as it relates to his support for veterans is the only thing that they can use are some clips that have been taken out of context and wrapped around this narrative to discredit former President Trump. But when it comes to Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, we have clips showing their actions that they don't really support the military. He's checking his watch when a service member is being offloaded off the aircraft to be buried. She's doing a sit-down interview celebrating the fact that she was a person who helped them make that decision with Afghanistan. Both of these individuals have yet to sit down and speak to these families. Those are actions. You're going to give me some shit about what Donald Trump said on a stage that you guys take out of context? Show me some of his actions where he's spitting in the face of veterans. There are none. So here are my takeaways as I wrap up this video. Number one, we obviously thank these families and these soldiers for their service, and every single veteran who's come before them that has given their lives for America. That's first takeaway. Second takeaway is judge people not necessarily on what they say, but by what they do. Let's compare the actions of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris versus Trump and J.D. Vance. And you tell me who truly supports the military. Go by the actions, not by what the media says they said. And takeaway number 3, it's interesting that someone can cross the border today, make up a lie on why they should get asylum, and get paid thousands of dollars immediately. But when it comes to a veteran who's given his time or her time and her service to this great nation, they have to fight tooth and nail just to get benefits. So that's my mindset. What about you? What do you guys think about the fact that Joe Biden was probably on a beach somewhere, Kamala Harris was in hiding somewhere, and Trump was doing what a commander-in-chief should do? I want to hear what your thoughts are and more in the comment section below. Thank you for checking out the video today. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Stay grateful, stay focused, and stay true. Peace.